just talk. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to a special seminar for the Centre for Urban Research at RMIT University. On behalf of the university, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we're meeting today, the Woiwurrung and Boonwurrung language groups of the Eastern Kulin Nation, and acknowledge elders past and present, and also acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands and waters across Australia where the university conducts its business. So we're really pleased today to welcome to the Centre for Urban Research Alan Mcneil, who is the Commissioner for Lands in the Solomon Islands. The Centre for Urban Research very much focused on questions to do with urban planning, urban development, urbanisation, as well as a strong emphasis on land development. So to have a presentation, a seminar on this topic focused on the Solomon Islands is a real pleasure for us. And Alan's visit has been coordinated by Professor Darren McAvoy, who leads the Climate Resilient Urbanisation in the Asia Pacific Group, which is located in the RMIT School of Engineering, but is now closely affiliated with the Centre for Urban Research, and is helping us to build our knowledge and understanding and activity in the Pacific Islands, in particular the Solomon Islands and Vanuatu. So as I mentioned, I'm really pleased to welcome Alan today. Alan has studied at RMIT, having done a Masters of Social Science in International Development. He's worked as an urban planner in New South Wales, Papua New Guinea and the UK. He first arrived in the Solomon Islands in 2004, working as a planning advisor to Guadalcanal Provincial Government and then with Honiara City Council. He's been with the National Ministry of Lands as Commissioner of Lands since 2018. And as Commissioner, Alan is essentially the landlord and gatekeeper of land owned by the Solomon Islands government and fields numerous applications for land every day. So he's going to talk to us today about the challenges, issues, problems, disputes, complexity, pitfalls and so on with land ownership in the Solomon Islands. So I'll hand over to Alan and just note that we're recording this session, so if anyone says anything, it'll probably get recorded on the video. We also have a number of people attending online. Alan will speak for about 30 minutes and then we'll have the chance of questions and conversation afterwards. So welcome, Alan.
Thank you, Jago. Morning, everyone. So thank you for the introduction. I also want to acknowledge the Eastern Kulin Nation and elders past, present and emerging. Also, I wish to thank Professor Darren McAvoy, RMIT University, and Alexi. I've known these people for quite some time now, for something approaching 10 years since I've been back at Solomon Islands at the Ministry of Lands, and of course I've had a lot of dealings with RMIT and Melbourne University since that time. So yeah, thank you for that invitation to come here and present to you today. So as you've already heard, I'm the Commissioner of Lands for Solomon Islands. It's a position that dates back about 100 years now, since the British Solomon Islands Protectorate days, that there has been a role of Commissioner of Lands to help administer and manage land for the Solomon Island government. So I'm just going to give you a brief overview first about where all the land is situated in terms of land tenure. So this slide just gives you an idea of the black areas, the ones that are highlighted or shaded black are those that are registered lands in Solomon Islands. Anything else that is not surrounded by black lines is customary land. And the key figure here is on the right-hand side of the slide, where it shows that up almost 20%, and that figure is a little bit out of date, but around about 20% of the land area of Solomon Islands is registered. I prefer not to use that word alienated, the GIS person put that there, but I'll get to that in a moment. I prefer to use the term registered versus unregistered, or registered versus customary as the key indicator. Some provinces have more registered land than others, as you can sort of see on the overview there. Choiseul, Makira, there's not very much registered land. Guadalcanal, Isabel, Western provinces, quite a lot due to that historical fact that there's been a lot of plantations in those areas over time. So one of the problems that the whole country faces is that there's no government recognition of who actually owns that 80% of the land area. So there's no official government record or register of who owns that 80% of the land area. There have been court cases that have decided some areas, but there's no actual government register or record. And there aren't that many ways that you can actually change customary land to being registered land. There's something called customary land recording. So there is a national recorder who's appointed under a National Records Act, National Land Recording Act, who is the person that can facilitate the recording of land. That's not registration, it's recording. But after you have the land recorded, you can potentially take the next step of getting the land registered. So this is something that a customary landholding group can approach the National Recorder and say, we want our land officially recorded. If we have the funding and the people to do this, we can go through that process, and it's quite a lengthy process to have that land recorded. But it is one of the potential ways that can be done. The other way that can be done to switch from land being customary to registered is through land acquisition. But this is where the government is saying, we wish to acquire your customary land. And that might not be what the customary landowners want. But that's the traditional way that most people know how to switch from what is being just unregistered customary land to registered land. I'm going to give you an example of land acquisition. So this is a process that we went through. It's just a case study to show you what we did in one particular case. So there's this place called Frigates Island. Another name for it is Nawhinua Island in the local language. It's down on your bottom right-hand side of the screen there. It's in Makira, or what was the Spanish called San Cristobal Island. And it's a beautiful spot where a bunch of surfers, most of them are from Torquay, not that far away, who wanted to build a little resort. Now look at that beautiful island. That is Nawhinua, or Frigates Island. And they found this island just by searching Google Earth and thought, right, there the surfing breaks, we can see that, and the water currents. And then they went there and checked it out and saw, yep, there's beautiful waves here. Now, these surfers wanted to build a small resort there. And so they are doing it. There they are. There's Maxi up on the roof. These guys are builders as well, or 3 out of 4 of them are builders. The other one's a sushi chef, which could be quite handy too. And so they're employing local people to help them build this little resort on Nawhinua Island. It's only a 2-hectare island, but it's big enough for them to do a few villas and water tanks and do a nice sustainable resort there on the island. So how do we go through this acquisition process? I could spend a whole hour talking about this, but just in a nutshell, here's the process. So first of all, these investors think, right, we want a lease. We don't want to just go in there to unregistered customary land and just build our resort without having a security of land title. So they needed a lease of some sort. They needed something secure. So they asked the Ministry of Culture and Tourism, how do we do this? And then that ministry asked me, so how do we do this? So then I got involved in starting an acquisition. So I appoint somebody called an acquisition officer. That's quite a powerful person. They have a power pretty much like a magistrate, because ultimately they're deciding who they think are the landowners. They put up a notice advertising the fact that we're going to have a hearing, and anyone that wants to say that they're the landowner has to come along and prove their point. Come with their genealogy stories, tell us about how they think that they own the island, and see if there are any objections to that, see if anybody else has the same story. So that public hearing was held. The acquisition officer then hears all the stories and says, well, here's who I think the landowners are based on what I've heard. Then he advertises, or she advertises, that notice to say, here's my determination. I believe these are the landowners. And then people have the opportunity to appeal to the local magistrates court in Kira in Mcneil province. In this case, there were 2 objections, and the magistrates court heard those objections and dismissed them. It didn't go any further than that. That was the end of the story with this one. But potentially you could go a step further and go to the High Court of Solomon Islands and continue to object on a point of law. That didn't happen in this case. At the end of the process, the acquisition officer comes to me and says, here's the outcome, and here's the outcome of the magistrates court hearing, if there was one. Then I sign an order saying, I now vest this land in the name of these traditional landowners, because they're not selling the land. They're keeping the land title, the freehold land title. All they're doing is having that, so that is the basis on which to give a lease to, initially to me as the commissioner, because that's what the Act says we have to do. I'm the intermediary, and then I transfer that lease to the investors. So that's what happened. That was the process in a nutshell. And here's how it worked. So this is the picture that the acquisition officer took of the people gathered at that hearing. So everyone sits around, tells their stories. He's recorded who was there at the meeting, so it's all documented. And then at the end of the process, there's our acquisition officer in red, who is indicating to one of the landowners, this is where you sign the lease to the Commissioner of Lands. And then there's the Commissioner of Lands signing the lease as well. And we did this in front of everybody in the Namulga village who lived on the mainland. They came across to Ngāwhenua Island for this big kind of celebration, really, to say, we are finalising this lease and here's the land title. So I'll move on now to registered land. So this is the other 20% of the land area. So as I said before, I had a problem with this word alienated, and that's because just because land is registered doesn't mean it's owned by aliens, so to speak. Some of it is owned by government, some of it is owned by people who are not from that area, but much of it is owned by people from that area. So they're not aliens to that area, they're the indigenous people of that area who own the perpetual estate in that land title. So they're not aliens to the area, but they are the registered owners. So foreigners can't own freehold land. Very important point to make. You have to have at least 2 grandparents who are of an indigenous lineage to a tribe in Solomon Islands in order to own perpetual estate. And the Gilbertese settlers who came as well are also included in that definition. So you have to have at least 50% bloodline of a tribe to Solomon Islands to own freehold land. So anyone else can own a fixed term estate or a lease, but no longer than 75 years. So unlike, say, Canberra, for example, where you have 99-year leases, the maximum term in Solomon Islands for a foreigner to own land is 75 years. So if it's a government-issued long-term lease, it's called a fixed-term estate. And anyone else who owns a perpetual estate can give a lease, not a fixed-term estate. But for all intents and purposes, they're pretty much the same thing. You've got the right to use and develop the land for up to maximum 75 years. Okay, I'll spend a bit of time just talking a bit about this, what I'm calling the conundrum that Solomon Islands has been grappling with for a long time. On the one hand, people want to retain ownership of their land. They don't want to lose their land and become a landless people. They're very aware of how that has gone wrong in other countries. So there is this desire to retain the ownership of the land, but at the same time, there is a desire to develop the land and offer it to investors so that investors can come in and build things and everyone can benefit from that. They can be employed by an investment-driven development, or they can become part owners in that. But how do they do this without losing their land? So that is a conundrum, as I say, that's the word, of how do we balance up these two things so that we don't lose our land, but we can attract investment as well. A bit of a point there about logging companies. There's lots of logging that goes on in Solomon Islands, and the point about logging companies is that they don't really, I'm saying don't care about land title, which is true. They're there for 5 years or maybe 10 years at most. They'll bring in their machinery, their demountable buildings, and they're gone again. They'll take all of that away with them. So they don't need land title. It's not important to them. But if you wish to do a tourism development like Ngāwhenua Island, then you are going to be investing in that land. You are going to be pouring millions of dollars into developing the land. You want that land title. So it's very different to a logging operation. But customary landowners are worried, as I say, that there might be people that will come along and take advantage of the situation if you go to the point of the land being registered. There might be people, they're called trustees in Solomon Islands. They're the names of the people who are actually on the land title. But the rest of the tribe might say, well, they're going off and doing things without consulting with us. So that is quite a common problem in Solomon Islands, is that if you get the land registered, there might be people that will take advantage and do something that's not in the best interests of the tribe. Everybody loves cartoons. Here's a couple from the Solomon Star newspaper from some time ago, and this really encapsulates that conundrum. So here's the landowner sitting back saying, look, we're a rich country in terms of our land, but we're poor in terms of cash, basically. And then there's a government official saying, well, open up your land for development, then you'll be rich. Then you can be realizing the potential of your land. But then there's the other person who's raising the counterpoint argument that this is all we've got. The land is all we've got. So the government must help us to protect our land title. So that's the conundrum. And then here's another one, slightly different scenario, where a developer comes along with her bulldozer saying, hey, look, I've bought this land fair and square off the landowner. And so now I'm here, I'm going to develop the land. And this one's in Pidgin, but the concern being raised there is that, well, we're the landowners, we don't know anything about this. Whatever deal you've done, it's not straight, it's not clear, we don't know anything. And then the final comment there, it shouldn't be sold by individuals. The land is owned by the tribe. So that's the sort of general feeling that you do get around customary land being converted into registered land and then sold, that can cause some issues, some difficulties. And this is another comment in the newspaper. To say that land is an obstacle, it's not really true. It's more that dispute over land ownership is the issue. Land per se is not the problem, it's not the obstacle, but it's all those disputes around ownership, and that's causing difficulty, or it's causing people to just stay well clear of Solomon Islands if they're concerned about the too many disputes over land ownership. And so that was a permanent secretary of tourism voicing that concern. So moving on to urban issues. Now, we can't really talk about urban in the context of Solomon Islands without talking about Guadalcanal. So Guadalcanal is the island that Honiara is built on, and it's there are a lot of context or issues surrounding land on Guadalcanal that affects Honiara as well. So that's just the location of Honiara in relation to Guadalcanal Island. So very short history. Again, I could have spent a lot more time on this, but if you want to take a note of that website at the bottom there, this is a book by Professor Clive Moore at University of Queensland, who's written a book on Honiara, and it's a very large, extensive book that goes into the entire history of Honiara, how it all came about. Very good book, so I recommend it if you want to know more about the history of Honiara. It's free to download, so very easy to do so. But just in a nutshell there, the first purchases around Honiara were done in the 1880s. It was just plantations, so Europeans coming along saying, we want to buy some land here to set up a coconut plantation. And so that was done. And then, of course, Honiara became the center of fighting during World War II in Guadalcanal. So there was the Battle of Guadalcanal. The Japanese initially started building their air force, the airfield there. And then, of course, the Americans came in, took over, and called the place that is now Honiara Camp Guadal. And when they left it to the British, and the British decided that to call this the new capital instead of the old capital, Tulagi, because of the infrastructure that was already there and the airfield that was there nearby. So again, in Clive Moore's book, he talks a lot about Honiara initially being a centre for expatriate administrative centre, and then over time it's evolved into a place that is more like a series of villages. So you've got people from a certain part of Solomon Islands settling in one area around Honiara, and they have their own elders, and it's like recreating the village inside Honiara. So it's become this kind of hybrid village-like collection of communities that together is Honiara. So yeah, further reading on Professor Clive Moore's book there. I'll talk a little bit here about the census. I won't dwell on all of these figures here, but essentially the population of Honiara and Greater Honiara in Guadalcanal Province has grown exponentially over time. And it's those areas in Guadalcanal Province on the fringes that have grown even more than Honiara these days. But the average household size has decreased with slightly fewer people in each house. So the question I'm posing at the end there is, where are they all going? Where are all these people settling around Honiara? So a lot of those people are squatters. They're living on government land without the permission of the government. But a lot of those people are claiming that they bought the land off traditional landholders. According to the land title, they're not the landowners, but they'll claim to be the landowners, and they'll quote the Townsville Peace Agreement, which is something that was signed during the ethnic tension period of 98 to 2003. And there's also after the tension finished, there was the Truth and Reconciliation Report. And we talk about that on the next slide, after the Gilbert Camp. So I'll just talk a little bit about this one. So what we have here is an area just outside of Honiara boundary. Up on the top left, you can see a line that's going diagonally across there. That's Honiara on the top left. And then the rest of this is Guadalcanal Province. So that is an image in Google Earth. Anyone can look at that from 20 years ago, showing just how widespread the settlement was back then. And that's 20 years later. So it's quite striking. I think you'll agree. Hardly anyone there has got legal land title. They're all squatters, pretty much. So they've all just come in. Probably somebody has said, oh, I'm the landowner here. And a person said, well, okay, can I build a house here? Yeah, give me some money and go ahead and build. That's the kind of deal that people are making. Similar thing with a place called April Hill or April Ridge, April Valley. People have got different names for it. There were devastating floods in 2014 at the Mcneil River and a place called Coa Hill. Coa Hill, even though it's called a hill, a lot of the area is flat and down near the river. And the government identified this place for them to relocate to safer ground. And for some warped reason, they called it after the month of the floods. So that's the month of the floods, April 2014. Not much there. So the government said, here's an area that people can move into. And that's how it is just 9 years later. So a big change. You can see a lot more houses in the area. So we did actually do a proper subdivision plan for that area, but people moved in too fast and it was too uncontrolled. So despite those attempts, people have just settled wherever they feel like it. And of course, all this squattering, unemployment is causing major headaches or major problems for the country. And so you'll often see articles like this in the newspaper, editorials. And this is a comment from Dr. Joe Kona, who's at University of Hawaii now, who's made the comment that it's like a ticking time bomb. All these people moving in, lots of unemployed people without jobs, and there's nothing for them to do, but they're just squatting on the edges of Honiara. And one of the things that has been suggested there to do is to have more land titles made available around Honiara so that people can actually have a land title, and also promote more development in the provinces so that you have job opportunities in the provinces, not just everyone coming to Honiara for work. So the ethnic tension period, I've talked about that, and the Townsville Peace Agreement, the Truth and Reconciliation Report, which said all land should be given back to traditional landholders in Guadalcanal, because land was one of the major factors, one of the major points of dispute during that tension period. And so people are still talking about this Townsville Peace Agreement today, and they're still talking about the Truth and Reconciliation Report, recommending to return all alienated land to the people of Guadalcanal. Easier said than done, but that's something that was recommended. And the Truth and Reconciliation Report also recommended that the Commission of Land should be a neutral person of good standing and integrity, and I hope I'm living up to those expectations. So this is my last series of slides here, and I'll just walk around on this one as well. This is a place called Adalua. It's inside the Honiara city boundary, and you can see the yellow lines there. Those are cadastral boundaries. There are parcel boundaries. People own land titles or have been offered land titles. But the big area in the middle, surrounded by red, is an area that had yet to be formalized in terms of land tenure. And these are people from a particular part of Solomon Islands as well. It's like one of these villages inside Honiara, Adalua community. And so we decided we're going to formalize the land title there. So our first step was to do a boundary identification survey. A surveyor comes along and maps out where are all the buildings, what are each of the buildings, is this a house, is this a kitchen, is this a toilet, where are the road accesses, so you can see those highlighted, and of course the contours. That gives the planners something to work on, so they can then look at that and try and work out how can we formalize the land title around this very busy, dense urban settlement. And then the final stage is, that's what the planners have come up with, is a design that shows where we can create lots, where we can formalize access. Some of those access ways are only footpaths. They'll only be very narrow, 3 meters or so. And the codes, as you can see, it shows this is a house or permanent house or semi-permanent house. So that's how the planners have said we can do this. And then after that stage, we will do a cadastral survey, which means putting pegs in the ground, creating lot numbers, parcel numbers. Then our urban team at the Ministry of Lands can go and check and make sure who owns each of the houses in that area. and then ask the land board for permission or approval to give land title offers to each of those people. It's quite a long process, but that's what can be done to at least formalize the land title for all of those people. Whether they take up that offer and pay for their offer, that's another question which somebody might want to ask me. And that's the end of my presentation. So thank you very much for listening, and I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you. Yep. Let's get back to that one. Yeah, thanks for the question. Yeah, there was quite a process involved in this. Initially, the acquisition officer found 5 people, and it's a number that you commonly see because that's the maximum number of people that can be put on a land title anyway. So they always go to the maximum number of people, 5. So the acquisition officer identified those people and had those names registered. Now, since that time though, the surfers had some difficulty securing a loan because the potential lenders were concerned about the perpetual estate being owned by 5 individuals. And they said it would be better if it's in the name of a landowners association rather than 5 people, trustees. So those 5 people did agree to setting up an association and to transferring that perpetual estate to that association. So that has been done. I think it would have been better to have that in the first place, in retrospect, to have the name of an association there, as long as they've got very strict rules about how that association is formed, how they choose their office bearers, involving women and children's interests as well in that association, making sure it's an all-inclusive association and not just one that 5 people will continue to have complete control over. So yeah, there was a bit more of the story to that, and that has been done, and it seems like everybody's happy so far. Thank you. Thanks, David. Yeah, you're right. When you see that pattern there, it is very clear that that is a much more dense settlement than the area around it. And I think that's a reflection of the fact that the areas around it were formalized earlier, before people had gone in there and built their houses. So it was more forward planning or greenfield site planning, if you like, to make sure that that is more orderly. And this bit was left over. So yes, it is a lot more dense. You can see just how many more houses are in that area in such a small area compared with everything around it. So Mamulele nearby, you can see down to the bottom of the right part of the screen, there's Mamulele, Master Liu a bit further away. So it is a challenge, but our planners did a great job when it came to this design here to try and figure out how they could divide up the area so that everyone who has a house in there would be offered a land title as well. So it's difficult, it's challenging, but that's what they could come up with. In some cases, there would be a need to remove some temporary buildings to make a better access into the area, or to just make the subdivision work better. So it did work out. We're not yet at the stage of offering the land titles, so this is still a process that is underway right now. But yeah, I mean, nothing's perfect, but that's what the planners could come up with in that case. Thank you.
Thanks, Alan. A few questions. Firstly, how did that 20% land became owned by the government? And secondly, culturally, is there an urge for people to actually have a land title, or they are happy continuing the way it has always been, that you just, it's their land and they can go and build wherever they want to? And maybe third, is land title given to men and women owners of the house, or just the man?
If you can just repeat the first part of the question there, there's some government land?
20% land
20%
became owned by the government.
Okay. Yes, thank you for those questions. So starting with the first one, the 20% is, there's no simple answer for that. I think it's just gradual, over time, acquisition of customary land. As I said, the first ones were plantation owners. So those are quite extensive areas of plantations. And I would say that that is how much of that 20% came about, is through the very early days of plantation owners coming in, making deals with the local people to buy the land, and then later acquisitions by government or by the British Solomon Islands Protectorate before that. And there's also been conversion of customary land through acquisitions later on as well. So if the government wanted to acquire land for an airfield, for example, or a hospital or a school, then they've gone through that acquisition process. So there are various ways of how that 20% came about in the first place. The other questions, is it just the male head of the household? I've tried to encourage our lands officers, when they do a subdivision like this one that you see here, when they go out and ask people who owns this house here, I do encourage them to make sure that we are including all the heads of the household, not just the male head of the household. And that is reflected in the land board, what is put to the land board, and then the land board decides, yes, we'll give these offers. Sometimes it's just a woman head of the household, and sometimes it's couples. So yeah, it does vary household to household, but it's not just male focused on that. Your last question, or the middle question actually, was do people actually want land title? So this is it's a kind of mixed answer to this. Generally, yes, because I do get, as Jago mentioned in my introduction, I get applications for land all the time. I've got people applying in areas like this, but also around the country, saying, can you please give us land title? So I do get these requests frequently, and they know already that it's government-owned land, so they come to me saying, please give us this slice of government-owned land. So there is generally a great desire to have land titles, but at the same time, if we go through this process with Adelua and we give out offers of land title, there's a kind of mistaken belief, I guess, or a wishful thinking that this offer is essentially a land title already. And it's not, of course. It's only an offer of a land title, and it's subject to them paying fees to the government. And many of them don't do that. And months or years can pass and they still haven't paid their land title. but they just think, right, I've got my piece of paper and this is my land title, but it's only an offer. Some of them do pay those offers and they do get their land titles, and the motivation for them doing that might be that they can then sell it on the proper way instead of on the black market. They can lease it out to government employees, which you can't do if you're simply squatting on government land. So that might be an incentive because you can make money from leasing out your house. You can get a bank loan, which you can't do, of course, if you're just squatting on the land. So there are a few advantages there. The disadvantage is that you have to pay money for the offer, and then you'll have to pay an annual land rent to the government as well. And you'll have to start paying council rates as well. So there are extra costs involved in doing that. But quite a few people have taken up those offers and started to pay and become rate-paying citizens. Yeah, thank you.
Further questions? Yes.
Commissioner. So my question is regarding land that outside of Honiara boundary that's not subdivided. What's the process like when you wish to do this kind of subdivision?
Yeah, thanks for the question. So I think we're talking here, if we can go back to the Gilbert Camp area would be a good example. So for example, this area, it's mainly outside of the town boundary. That area was acquired by the government, but it's not straightforward. There are actually 2 High Court claims over that land and 5 caveats on the land title. So even if we wanted to do a subdivision of that area and formalise that area, even if we wanted to, we can't, because it's caught up in legal process, it's caught up in litigation. So although we would desire to do something in that area, we can't. The government itself can develop the land, so we could build a new hospital there, we could put a new cemetery there, we can do things like that, because that doesn't require anything to be done to the land title. But we can't offer land title to these people that have moved into the area already. So there's no simple answer to this. If it's land that is free of any caveats or free from any High Court claims, not this area, but maybe other areas around town, maybe we can do that. But there isn't much government-owned land left around Honiara outside the town boundary. A lot of it is in private hands already, such as Levers Solomons, who still own a very large swathe of area out towards the airport, and Tenuru, Black Post area. That's all in private hands. There's not a lot of government-owned land outside and nearby the city boundary where we could formalise land title in the same way that we can with Adalua inside the town boundary. So it's not easy, and it does depend, in answer to your question, it does depend on exactly where we are talking about outside the Honiara city boundary. We would need to firstly see who owns the land right now and what potential there is to do anything in that particular location. Thank you.
Just about the question is, are you facilitating for that? And is that more likely to kind of be in the Chiltern area, or would there be other? That's the province.
Okay, yep. Thanks for the online question. Yes, there are other acquisitions that we're doing. So there is another tourism related one in the Shortland Islands, and that has been in process for quite a long time, because not only was there an appeal to the Magistrates Court, there was also an appeal to the High Court, and it's taken years to go through that process, and that's for a similar kind of island tourism development. Other ones might come from other ministries. So we don't know when or where these might come up. But let's say, for example, the Ministry of Police, National Security, Correctional Services, they've come to me saying, can we acquire land for a new police post, again in Shortland Islands? And we've said, yes, okay, we can do that for you, but can you fund the process? Because we don't know when and where, as I said, these requests might come, so we don't have a set budget set aside at the Ministry of Lands for these things. So as long as those ministries can say, yes, we've got a budget for this, I'll say, okay, good. I'll appoint an acquisition officer then, but you pay all their costs. So the acquisition officer will go to Kariki, is the name of the place in Shortlands, make an agreement with the landowners to say, we are acquiring your land. They've already in principle said that they will do this. So then there's an agreement and you go through all the process of having a public hearing, etc., etc. So as long as the Ministry of Police are meeting those costs, we can go through that process. So it might be driven by investors in the case of the surfers. It might be driven by a national interest, a national government interest to have a police post or a hospital or a school or any other kind of government infrastructure that we want to put on what is currently customary land. It might be a mining group that wants to do a mine and they do want the land title for the area. So there are many of those kind of potential land acquisitions that we can go through. What was the other part of that question? Yeah, the province can play a factor. There are essentially 4 different ways that land can be acquired. So you can either acquire the land outright, or you can acquire the land by lease. So in the case of the surfers, it was a lease. And acquiring the land outright, of course, the surfers can't do that because they're foreigners, they can't own freehold land title. But if the government wanted to acquire land outright, it can do so. Now, the same goes for the province. So the provincial assembly, it can't be just the premier, it can't be just the provincial executive. The Act is very clear that it has to be the full assembly. That means all of the elected members for that province. When they hold a meeting together, it's the assembly. They can decide that they want to acquire land. So it can either be the commissioner acquiring a lease or outright, or it can be the provincial assembly acquiring the land outright or lease. They're your 4 options. So the province gets involved at that stage if it's them that wants to acquire the land. If it's me acquiring the land, we will have consultations with the province as well, but it's only to consult with them and make sure that they're aware of what's going on, rather than them having an integral part of the process. That they could lead the process themselves if they wanted to. The province can acquire customary land. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you, Commissioner. My question is regarding registered land held by Commission of Lands on behalf of SIG located in provinces. What is the process of, like, I know that some provinces are calling on the government to give them the perpetual estate so that they can hold it on behalf of the people or on behalf of the assembly. What is the process of doing that, and what is your opinion on that? Is it safe for them to hold perpetual estate in provinces or in the land that are located in provinces, or is it safer to be with the Commission of Lands? Because I think from a practical perspective, it is more prudent for provincial assembly, as they are the ones closer to the people, to actually be in custody of the perpetual estates. But I think as the case is now, some of the lands are still under the government, held by Commission of Lands. So I think those are the 2 questions that I wanted to probably clarify for us. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the question. It's this is quite a topical thing at the moment because the Western Province Premier has announced, so it's been in the media, that they do want to see the return of perpetual estates in Western Province from the Commission of Lands to the Western Province. So that is coming to us now. Provinces are aware that we've already done this a few years ago now with Mcneil province, that all of the perpetual estates in that province have been transferred from the Commission of Lands to Mcneil province. And I was part of the special, well, it's called a second appointed day ceremony in Mcneil, where I signed the transfer of the perpetual estate over from myself to the Premier during their celebrations on their second appointed day. And everyone was gathered there to watch. The Prime Minister in the background. It was witnessed by everybody. So the other provinces are kind of jealous of that and saying, well, if you've done it for Mcneil, why can't you do it for our province as well? The first slide that I brought up showed how much registered land there is in different provinces. Mcneil is quite a small province in terms of how much land is registered. Western Province is quite different. There's a lot of registered land. And of course, Guadalcanal Province is another one. It comes to a much bigger question that I think we need some guidance from Cabinet on this one. Do we transfer all of the perpetual estates owned by the Commissioner of Lands in all of the provinces to those provinces so that we have no national government land left anywhere apart from Honiara? Or do we need to retain some? And this is a much bigger question than for just me to answer. Ultimately, it's the land board that will make that decision, but they might say, well, ooh, this is a big thing. We need to get some guidance from an even higher authority of the Cabinet on this one. So yes, it's something that we are dealing with right now, with particularly Western Province, seeking the transfer of perpetual estates. Is it better for the landlord? So if you own a fixed term estate, say in Gizo or Noro, and your landlord right now is the Commissioner of Lands, because the Commissioner of Lands holds the perpetual estate, and the Commissioner of Lands is collecting your land rent off you as you being the fixed term estate owner. Would you rather see your perpetual estate remain with the Commissioner of Lands, or would you be happy for the landlord to change to being the Western Provincial Executive or Assembly? Would you still feel your land title is safe with a different landlord? These are all questions that need to be answered. I don't have all those answers because you need to consult with those people. Would the Provincial Assembly or provincial government retain those land titles, or would they sell them to the original traditional landowners? Maybe they would. Maybe your landlord would change from being the commissioner to the Western Province and then to the original tribal owners. Maybe they would transfer it again back to those people. Then what happens to your fixed term estate if you have a fixed term estate? Would your land rent increase? So would your new landlord, the Western Province, increase your land rents? When it comes to the end of your fixed term estate, we normally have a process where we renew those fixed term estates. We offer a new grant for another 75 years. Would the new landlord do that? Would the Western Province do that? Or if they transfer it to original landowners, would they do that? I think in Canberra now, some of the 99-year leases, the first ones are expiring and they're just being automatically renewed. We don't necessarily automatically renew fixed term estates. We do in 99% of the time, unless the government has some real intention of that particular location and we want to take the land back. So there's a lot of questions. Sorry, there's no simple straight answer as to whether that's a good thing to do for the transfer of land titles to the province. It's ultimately up to the land board, and maybe we need to consult higher to Cabinet to get some guidance on that. Thank you.
Right, have to wrap it up now, Alan.
Okay.
Because we're close to time. So look, thank you very much for your presentation. Absolutely fascinating. I'd love to hear more about all of your work and conditions and challenges you face there. Certainly complex, I think, justice to the title of your talk. So on behalf of everyone here and on behalf of the Centre for Urban Research and the Climate Resilient Urbanisation in the Asia Pacific program at RMIT, thank you for your presentation, and we look forward to formal conversation. Formal part is ended. So, thank you.
Thank you.